While securing the chain on the storage shed, a smell hit my nose. A sharp smell. I turned around and my blood ran cold. Black smoke was billowing from the windows of my main shelter, and orange flames had begun to consume the wooden walls. Before continuing, if stories about the incredible bonds between humans and wild animals move you, subscribe to Arctic Wolf Legends and hit the like button. Leave a comment indicating the time and city where you are watching. Now let me tell you about that night that changed everything. I started running across the frozen ground. My heart was beating so fast, I thought it would jump out of my chest. It wasn't just the building that was burning. Inside were my animals, whom I loved more than anything. 2 Alaskan huskies, Aurora and Blizzard. My small reindeer herd. My sled dogs. Everything I had built over 10 years in Alaska's wild nature, 40 miles from the nearest town. I reached the heavy door and yanked it open. The heat slammed into me like a physical force. I stepped inside, and in that exact moment, I heard a terrible cracking sound above. A burning support beam gave way, crashing down. I jerked my head back, but the beam caught my left leg, pinning me to the floor. The pain was instant, blinding. Everything went black. I came to from a sound I knew well, a low, urgent growl right next to my ear. Through the thick smoke, I could barely make out the shape standing over me. Ghost, the white wolf I'd found as an injured pup 3 winters ago, half-starved and caught in a trap. I'd spent weeks nursing him back to health, and against every law of nature, he'd stayed. Not as a pet, Ghost was never that, but as something else. A companion, a guardian. Now Ghost was gripping my jacket sleeve in his powerful jaws, pulling with everything he had. His ice-blue eyes were wild with urgency. He wasn't just growling, he was whining, whimpering, a desperate sound I'd never heard from him before. The smoke was so thick, I could barely see his white fur, just inches from my face. I pushed against the beam with both hands. Pain shot through my leg like lightning, but the beam shifted slightly. Ghost pulled harder, his teeth never breaking the fabric but the force nearly dragging me across the floor. With one final shove, the beam rolled away. Agony exploded through my leg, but I managed to stand, leaning heavily on Ghost's strong back. Together, we stumbled toward the exit. We made it out, and I collapsed onto the snow, 20 feet from the burning shelter. The cold air burned my lungs as I gasped for breath. I looked down at my leg. The beam hadn't broken the bone, but the muscle and ligaments were badly damaged. I could barely move my foot. Ghost sat beside me, his chest heaving, his normally pristine white coat streaked with soot and ash. I looked at the shelter, watching flames tear through the structure I'd built with my own hands. And then I heard them. The animals. Aurora and Blizzard howling in terror. The reindeer bleating. The sled dogs barking frantically. The sounds were heartbreaking. With shaking hands, I pulled out my satellite phone and called the fire department. The operator in Fairbanks answered. The nearest station was 50 kilometers away, she told me, at least 45 minutes in these conditions. She instructed me to stay away from the fire. How could I stay away? Everything I had was burning. I sat in the snow, phone clutched in my hand, tears freezing on my cheeks. 10 years. 10 years of building this life, of surviving in one of the harshest environments on Earth, and it was all turning to ash and smoke before my eyes. Then Ghost suddenly jumped up. He barked sharply and instantly turned his head toward the shelter. Before I could understand what was happening, the wolf fearlessly leaped into the flames and disappeared from sight. "Ghost, no!" I shouted, trying to stop him. My foot twisted and I fell onto the snow. While my wolf fought the flames, I could only watch them. Inside the shelter, Ghost advanced through the suffocating smoke. The heat was unbearable. Flames were climbing the walls, and the shelter's ceiling beams had begun to creak. The roof could collapse on us at any moment. He found the husky pen first. Aurora and Blizzard were throwing themselves against the fence, howling in terror. Ghost approached the latch, grabbed it in his jaws and pulled. The metal was scorching hot, searing his mouth, but he didn't let go. He pulled again, harder. The latch gave way with a screech, and the gate swung open. But the huskies didn't move. They pressed against the far wall, frozen in fear. Ghost barked at them, a commanding sound that cut through their panic. When they still didn't move, he darted forward and nipped Aurora's hind leg. Not hard enough to injure, but enough to break through her paralysis. The effect was immediate. Aurora bolted for the door, and Blizzard followed. Ghost ran ahead of them, leading them through the maze of smoke toward the exit. Outside, I was watching the entrance, barely breathing, my hands gripping the snow. The seconds felt like hours. Then, like apparitions emerging from hell itself, Aurora and Blizzard burst through the smoke. They galloped past me, their eyes wide and white with terror, and didn't stop until they reached the tree line 100 yards away. I couldn't believe what I'd just witnessed. Ghost had somehow opened their pen and driven them out. But before I could process this miracle, a white shape emerged from the smoke. Ghost appeared in the doorway, paused for just a second, his eyes meeting mine, and then turned back toward the flames. "Ghost, stop!" I shouted. "They're out, come here!" But the wolf ignored me and disappeared back into the burning structure. That's when I realized there were still animals inside. The reindeer, the sled dogs, Luna the Arctic fox and her kits. Ghost was going back for them. The wolf pushed deeper into the shelter, the smoke now so thick it was nearly impossible to see. Part of the roof collapsed with a tremendous crash behind him, cutting off half the passage. Ghost dropped low, where the air was slightly clearer, and crawled forward. He reached the reindeer pen. 5 reindeer were inside, including Maggie, the most stubborn of the herd. Ghost clawed at the latch until it broke free. The gate swung open, and the reindeer scattered in panic, running in different directions. Ghost moved among them, using body language to get them out of there. He bit their legs, barked, growled, trying everything to keep them from fleeing in panic. Maggie, as usual, tried to go deeper into the shelter, but Ghost blocked her. He showed her his big white teeth. Maggie flinched and started to follow the others. Outside, I saw 5 reindeer burst out of the smoke, their silhouettes against the flames behind their antlers. They ran past me and joined the huskies at the edge of the trees. I was so excited I didn't know what to do. Part of the roof suddenly collapsed, and sparks of orange flame shot up into the sky. The flames were growing more intense. Even from 30 feet away, I could feel the heat on my face. Ghost had gone back in there for a 3rd time. The structure was coming apart. How much longer could it stand? Inside, Ghost's front paw was badly burned from the hot metal latch. The fur on his left side was singed, and his lungs burned with every breath. But he pushed forward. The sled dogs were in the far corner, 6 of them, yelping in terror. He found their pen and forced the door open. But like the huskies before them, the dogs were paralyzed with fear. They wouldn't move. Ghost looked around frantically. Then he spotted something. A sack of dried fish near the entrance, part of their winter food supply. Ghost grabbed the sack in his jaws and dragged it toward the sled dogs. He shook it, scattering chunks of fish across the floor in a trail leading toward the exit. The dogs, driven by instinct, even through their fear, began to follow the food. Ghost backed up in front of them, continuing to scatter the fish, leading them out. Moments later, 6 sled dogs tumbled out of the shelter. They were scattered, disoriented, but alive. They ran to join the other animals at the tree line. I was counting in my head. Huskies, reindeer, sled dogs. They were all outside. The relief was so great that I closed my eyes, threw my head back, and thanked God and Ghost. My incredible wolf had saved them all. Ghost burst out of the smoke, limping. His pure white fur had turned grey, and I noticed he was protecting his front paw. He walked toward me, and I reached out my arms to hug him. But Ghost suddenly stiffened. His ears pricked forward, and suddenly he turned around and started running back into the shelter, into the flames. "Ghost, no! Stop!" I shouted. "Everyone got out! They're all here!" But Ghost didn't listen to me. He disappeared into the flames again. Why had he gone back? I couldn't understand. I started to wonder if I had forgotten someone inside. Then it hit me like a punch to the gut. Luna, the Arctic fox. 3 days ago, she'd given birth to 4 kits in the far corner of the shelter, in a den box I'd built for her behind a storage rack. In my panic, I'd completely forgotten about them. Ghost, barely able to breathe, burned and exhausted, had gone back into that inferno for the fox and her babies. Inside, the conditions were beyond deadly. Ghost could barely see through the smoke. A main support beam overhead was cracking, groaning, seconds from collapse. He made his way to the far corner, where Luna's den box sat on a raised platform behind a metal shelf. The kits were crying, tiny, pitiful sounds barely audible over the roar of the flames. Luna was frantic, trying desperately to get her babies out, but the box was too high. She couldn't jump out while carrying a kit in her mouth. Ghost reached up with his paw and knocked the den box over. It tumbled to the floor, and the 4 tiny kits spilled out onto the ground. Luna immediately grabbed one in her teeth. Ghost carefully picked up a second kit, so small it fit entirely in his mouth, and turned toward the exit. Luna raced after him, the first kit dangling from her jaws. They moved as fast as they could, but Ghost was slowing down. The smoke had done its damage. His lungs were failing. Outside, I sat in the snow, my leg useless, listening to the sounds of destruction from inside the shelter. The smoke had grown even thicker. Flames were shooting through the roof. It had been too long, far too long. In the distance, I could hear sirens, the fire department. They were close, maybe 5 minutes away. But would they arrive in time? I stared at the entrance, where Ghost had disappeared, and I prayed. I prayed harder than I'd ever prayed in my life. The support beam inside gave way with a tremendous crack. "No," I whispered. Then, through the smoke and flames, I saw movement. A white shape emerged, moving slowly, dragging itself forward. Ghost. He was crawling, his hind legs barely working, and in his mouth he carried a tiny, squirming Arctic fox kit. Right behind him, Luna appeared, another kit in her jaws, her normally white fur completely grey with soot. Ghost took 3 more steps and collapsed onto the snow 10 feet from me. The kit fell from his mouth and let out a high-pitched squeal. Luna immediately picked up the baby and carried it away from the fire, depositing it with the first kit she'd rescued. I dragged myself through the snow toward Ghost, ignoring the screaming pain in my leg. The wolf was lying on his side, his chest heaving, his eyes half closed. Foam was coming from his mouth, carbon monoxide poisoning. His front paw was burned far worse than I'd thought, the pads black and raw. The fur on his side and back was charred down to the skin in places. I reached him and wrapped my arms around his neck, pressing my forehead against his. "You're the bravest wolf in the world," I whispered. "You're incredible. You're going to be okay. You have to be okay." Ghost's tail moved slightly, and he tried to lick my hand, but he had almost no strength left. A red fire truck roared into my property, lights flashing. Firefighters jumped out. The chief, a man named Davidson I'd met a few times, quickly assessed the situation and started barking orders to his crew. A young firefighter with kind eyes ran over to me. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," I managed. "But the wolf, he needs help. Now. He's got burns and smoke inhalation." The firefighter nodded and ran toward the truck. He grabbed a small oxygen tank and mask and returned. He carefully placed the mask over Ghost's mouth. Another firefighter examined Ghost's burned paw in detail. He unzipped the first aid kit and began treating the wound carefully. He then wrapped the burn with sterile bandages. Ghost no longer had the strength to move. While the firefighters worked to save the rest of my shelter, I lay on the snow wrapped around Ghost, carefully stroking his head, avoiding the burned areas. The adrenaline was now fading, and I could feel every wound, every pain. Only then did I notice something in the snow near Ghost, a piece of fabric he must have dropped after saving the sled dogs. I reached over and picked it up. It was a scrap of plaid flannel, stained with soot and ash. I frowned, turning it over in my hands. Where had this come from? Ghost had carried it out of the burning shelter, which meant it had been inside. But I definitely hadn't left any clothing in there. Sheriff Anders pulled up in his truck a few minutes later. He was an older man, weathered by decades in Alaska, with a grey beard and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He'd been the law in this region for 30 years and knew every homesteader for 100 miles. "Elias," he said, crouching beside me. "You all right? How's the leg?" "I'll survive," I said, handing him the piece of fabric. "Ghost brought this out of the shelter. I don't know what it is, but something about it feels wrong." Anders took the fabric, held it up to the light from the fire trucks, and examined it closely. His eyes narrowed. "Plaid flannel," he muttered. "Hang on." He stood and walked around, looking at the pattern carefully. Then he stopped. "I need to check something. Stay here." Sheriff got into his truck and drove away, leaving me confused and increasingly suspicious. Ghost, his eyes still closed, was now breathing more steadily under the oxygen mask. About 25 minutes later, Anders returned, and he wasn't alone. Marcus Frost got out of the passenger side door of the truck. He was my closest neighbor, living about 8 miles to the east. We had known each other for 12 years, helping each other through harsh winters, trading supplies when necessary. But right now, Marcus looked pale. He seemed ill. He couldn't meet my eyes. Anders came over to us, holding the piece of fabric. Then, to my surprise, he held it up to Marcus's shirt, exactly the same plaid flannel pattern. The sheriff pressed the piece of fabric against Marcus's sleeve, and I saw that it matched perfectly. There was a torn section on Marcus's sleeve, and its rough edges matched exactly with the fabric in Anders's hand. "Marcus," the sheriff said quietly, "I think you need to tell Elias what happened." Marcus stood there, hands shaking, head down. He was silent for several long seconds. Then he took a deep breath. "6 months ago," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "you bought that plot of land to the north from me. $40,000. I set the price. You paid it. Everything was fair." He paused, his jaw working. "But then, when you were building this new shelter, your crew was digging the foundation, and they found that underground hot spring. Pure geothermal water, worth a fortune up here. Everyone was talking about it. 'Lucky Elias,' they said. 'What a stroke of luck.'" Marcus finally looked up at me, and I saw anger and shame warring in his face. I started thinking, what if you knew about that spring beforehand? What if you bought my land cheap because you knew what was underneath? I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was angry, jealous. I couldn't sleep. And this morning, before dawn, His voice cracked. "I came here. I poured gasoline around your shelter and set it on fire." The words hung in the frozen air. I stared at him, not sure what I felt. Anger? Pity? Betrayal? This was a man I'd known for over a decade. We'd helped each other survive this brutal environment. We'd shared food during harsh winters. "Marcus," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I didn't know about the spring. Nobody knew. The crew found it by accident when they were digging. If I'd known, I would have told you." Marcus nodded, tears running down his face. "I know that now. But I was so consumed by jealousy that I couldn't see straight. I didn't think about your animals being in there. I didn't think you'd go inside. I wanted something of yours to burn like my hopes had burned." Sheriff Anders pulled out handcuffs. "Marcus Frost, you're under arrest for arson in the 1st degree." I watched as Anders cuffed Marcus and led him toward the truck, reading him his rights. Marcus was crying now, openly, shoulders shaking. I felt hollow inside. A neighbor I'd trusted, someone I'd considered a friend, had almost killed me and all my animals because of baseless jealousy. The fire was under control now. The firefighters had saved the basic structure, but everything inside was destroyed. 10 years of work, reduced to charred wood and ash. But when I looked around at my animals, Aurora and Blizzard huddled together, the reindeer standing near them, The sled dogs scattered but safe, Luna and her 4 kits curled in a protected spot. I realized none of that mattered. Buildings could be rebuilt. Materials could be replaced. But lives? The life of Ghost, this incredible white wolf who'd become my truest companion. The lives of my animals, those couldn't be brought back. Ghost stirred beside me, his eyes opening slightly. He looked at me, and in those ice-blue eyes, I saw what I had seen 3 years ago when I rescued him from the trap. A bond that defies words, transcending the boundary between wild and tame. I leaned down and pressed my forehead against his. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for everything." His tail twitched slightly. At that moment, I knew everything would be all right. The veterinary clinic in Fairbanks was a 2-hour drive away under good conditions. With my injured leg and Ghost's near unconscious state, it took nearly 3 hours. The young firefighter, whose name I learned was Jake, offered to take us in his pickup truck. He radioed Dr. Sarah Chen, the emergency vet, to let her know we were coming. Ghost lay across the back seat, wrapped in thermal blankets. I sat beside him, one hand on his side, feeling each labored breath. Every few minutes, he'd whimper softly, and my heart would break a little more. This wolf had saved my entire homestead, every living creature on it, and now he was fighting for his own life. "He's strong," Jake said from the driver's seat, glancing in the rearview mirror. "I've never seen anything like what he did tonight. That wasn't just animal instinct, that was pure heroism." "He's always been different," I said quietly, stroking Ghost's head. "From the moment I found him, there was something special about him." Jake nodded. "The story's already spreading, you know. The whole department's talking about the white wolf who saved all those animals. You're going to wake up famous." I didn't care about fame, I just wanted Ghost to survive. We arrived at the clinic at 2 in the morning. Dr. Chen was waiting outside with 2 assistants and a wheeled stretcher. They moved Ghost carefully, and I hobbled in after them on a pair of crutches Jake had grabbed from the fire station. "You need to get that leg looked at too," Dr. Chen said, as they wheeled Ghost into the examination room. "After," I said firmly. "Take care of him first." Dr. Chen was a woman in her 50s with steady hands and kind eyes. She'd treated everything from sled dogs to injured moose in her 30 years of practice, but even she paused when she saw Ghost. "A wild wolf," she said softly. "Or was wild once. Elias, you know I have to report this to Fish and Wildlife." "I know," I said, "but please, just save him first. We'll deal with the bureaucracy later." She nodded and got to work. I waited outside the examination room, pacing despite the pain in my leg, while Dr. Chen and her team worked on Ghost for nearly 2 hours. Finally, she emerged, pulling off her surgical gloves. "He's stable," she said, and I nearly collapsed with relief. The carbon monoxide poisoning was severe, but we've got him on pure oxygen. The burns on his paw are 2nd degree, painful and serious, but they'll heal. We've treated and bandaged them. The singed fur will grow back. He's sedated now and resting. "Can I see him?" "Of course, but then you're getting that." Leg X-rayed. No arguments. Ghost was lying on a padded table in the recovery room, an oxygen mask still over his muzzle. His white fur was clean now. They'd washed away the soot, and bandages covered his paw and patches on his side. He looked small somehow, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen him before. I pulled up a chair and sat beside him, taking his uninjured paw gently in my hand. "You did it," I whispered. "You saved them all. Now you rest. I'll be right here." His chest rose and fell steadily, and for the first time in hours, I allowed myself to breathe. The next few days blurred together. Dr. Chen kept Ghost at the clinic for observation. My leg wasn't broken, but the ligament damage was severe. I'd be on crutches for at least 6 weeks. I stayed at a cheap motel in Fairbanks, visiting Ghost 3 times a day. On the 3rd day, he was awake and alert when I arrived. His tail actually wagged when he saw me, and I had to blink back tears. Dr. Chen said his recovery was Remarkable, faster than any domestic dog would heal from similar injuries. "Wolves are tough," she said. "They have to be to survive out there." By the weekend, Ghost could walk, albeit with a limp. The burns were healing well, and his lungs had cleared significantly. Dr. Chen discharged him with strict instructions for wound care and follow-up visits. Jake drove us back to the farm. I didn't know what to expect, but seeing the remains of my shelter in daylight still hit me like a punch to the gut. The main structure was a skeleton of charred beams. Everything inside, tools, supplies, personal belongings, was gone. But my temporary shelter 50 meters away, a smaller building, remained intact. My animals were still there too. Neighbors who had heard the fire were looking after them. Aurora and Blizzard came running to greet Ghost, whimpering and licking his face. The reindeer approached cautiously. Even Luna appeared with her calves, chirping softly. It was as if they all knew. They all understood the Ghost had saved them. Over the following weeks, I lived in the temporary shelter while waiting for the insurance investigation. A fire inspector came out, documented everything, took samples. Sheriff Anders provided the official report about Marcus Frost's arrest and confession. Marcus was charged with first-degree arson and reckless endangerment. His bail was set at $50,000, money he didn't have. He'd be sitting in the Fairbanks jail until trial. Part of me felt bad for him. 12 years of neighborly friendship, destroyed by jealousy and a terrible decision. But every time I looked at Ghost's healing paw, or remembered those moments when I thought I'd lost him, the sympathy faded. The insurance adjuster, a tired-looking man named Hoffman, spent 2 days at the property. He measured, photographed, calculated. Finally, he sat down with me in the temporary shelter. "Mr. Stone," he said, "given that this was confirmed arson with a criminal conviction pending, your claim is approved in full. The payout will cover rebuilding the shelter, plus additional coverage for contents and business interruption." "How much?" I asked. $230,000. I sat back, stunned. It was more than I'd expected. Enough not just to rebuild, but to build something better, safer, fireproof. "There's one condition," Hoffman said. "You need to implement proper fire suppression systems, sprinklers, fire-resistant materials, multiple exits. This can't happen again." "It won't," I promised. 8 weeks after the fire, construction began on the new shelter. This time, I hired a professional crew from Fairbanks, experienced builders who specialized in cold climate structures. The design was mine, but I incorporated every safety feature I could think of. Steel frame instead of wood, fire-resistant composite walls, geothermal heating from the hot spring, automatic sprinkler system, multiple exits, separate, fireproof rooms for different animals. Ghost watched the construction every day, his paw fully healed now, only a slight limp remaining when he walked. He'd pace the perimeter of the building site, sniffing, investigating, as if he were personally overseeing the project. The lead builder, a grizzled man named Thomas, was fascinated by Ghost. "I've been working in Alaska for 30 years, he said one afternoon, "and I've never seen a wild wolf act like this. He's practically human." "He's family," I said simply. Thomas nodded. "I heard what he did. Hell, everyone's heard. You know, there's a reporter from Anchorage who wants to interview you, and some film crew from outside wants to make a documentary." I'd been avoiding all media requests. The story had spread far beyond Alaska. The white wolf who'd saved a dozen animals from a burning building had captured people's imagination. But I wasn't interested in publicity. This was Ghost's story, not mine. "Not interested," I told Thomas. "They're offering good money," he said. "Don't need it." What I needed was to rebuild my life, to get back to the quiet solitude of my homestead, the life I'd chosen when I'd left Seattle 12 years ago. One evening, about 3 months after the fire, I was sitting outside the temporary shelter when Sheriff Anders drove up. He stepped out, holding an envelope. "Thought you'd want to know," he said, sitting down beside me. "Marcus Frost took a plea deal. He'll serve 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, and he has to pay restitution, full amount of your damages. He doesn't have that kind of money, I said. No, but he'll be paying it off for the rest of his life. His property's been seized to cover part of it. He'll be broke when he gets out. I didn't feel any satisfaction hearing this. Marcus had destroyed his own life over imagined slights and baseless jealousy. There were no winners here. There's something else, Anders said. He handed me the envelope. This arrived at my office. It's addressed to you. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, Marcus's handwriting. Elias, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and you have every right to hate me. What I did was unforgivable. I nearly killed you. I nearly killed all your animals. I destroyed years of your work. But I want you to know, I'm glad you survived. I'm glad your wolf saved those animals. When Sheriff Anders told me what happened after I left, about Ghost going back in there 5 times, saving everyone, I broke down. I realized what I almost destroyed. I'm going to prison, and I deserve it. But when I get out, if you'll let me, I want to work for you. Not as a neighbor or friend, I know I've lost that right, but as hired help. I want to spend however long it takes making this right. I'm so sorry, Elias, for everything. Marcus. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Anders watched me carefully. You going to respond? He asked. Maybe, I said, after I've had time to think. But in truth, I wasn't sure what I felt. Anger had faded to something more complicated. Pity, disappointment, maybe even a small seed of forgiveness. Not yet, but someday. 4 months after the fire, the new shelter was finished. It was magnificent, spacious, safe, warm. Each animal had their own area with proper ventilation and emergency exits. The geothermal heating kept the entire structure warm even when temperatures dropped to 40 below. I moved my animals slowly, allowing them to adjust. Aurora and Blizzard loved their new space, larger barns with comfortable beds and windows to see outside. The reindeer had a spacious pen where they could move around. The sled dogs stayed in warm, comfortable individual kennels. Luna and her now much larger pups had a special shelter area with multiple hiding places and vertical areas they could climb. Ghost, of course, could roam freely throughout the entire property. But I did something special for him. Next to my own living area, a shelter room with a heated, large bed, its own entrance, and a window facing the northern lights. On the night we officially moved in, I stood in the middle of the new shelter with Ghost beside me, surveying everything we had rebuilt around me. The animals settled into their places and expressed their contentment with soft sounds. We did it, I said, scratching behind Ghost's ears. Better than before. Ghost looked at me with those ice-blue eyes, and I swear he understood every word. That night, I lay in my new bed in my new quarters, Ghost curled up on his bed nearby, and I thought about everything that had happened. I'd lost a building but gained a story I'd tell for the rest of my life. I'd lost a friendship but learned who could truly be trusted in this harsh land. And Ghost? Ghost had proven something I'd always believed but could never quite articulate, that the bond between human and animal could transcend species, could reach a level of understanding and loyalty that most people never experience. Spring came to Alaska the way it always did, slowly, grudgingly, with winter fighting for every day. But eventually the snow began to melt, revealing the land beneath. Green appeared where there'd been only white. The days grew longer. Ghost's limp disappeared entirely. His fur grew back thick and lustrous where it had been burned. Only a small scar on his paw remained as evidence of that terrible night. I was off crutches now, my leg fully healed. The homestead was thriving. I'd even added 2 more reindeer to the herd and another sled dog to the team. Life had returned to normal. Better than normal, actually. The new shelter was so much more efficient than the old one that I was saving money on heating and maintenance. The animals were healthier and happier. One evening in early May, I was checking on the animals before bed when Ghost suddenly went rigid beside me. His ears pricked forward, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. I followed his gaze. Someone was walking up the road toward the homestead. It was almost dark, but I could see it was a man, moving slowly, carrying a backpack. My hand went to the rifle I now kept by the door. After Marcus's betrayal, I was more cautious. But as the figure got closer, Ghost's growl faded. His tail started to wag, just slightly. Then I recognized the walk, the build. "Jake?" I called out. The young firefighter who'd driven us to the vet stepped into the light from the shelter. He looked exhausted, his face flushed from the hike. "Hey, Elias," he said, slightly out of breath. "Sorry to just show up like this. I tried calling, but your satellite phone went to voicemail." "Battery's dead," I said. "What are you doing here? Everything okay?" Jake shifted his backpack. "I need to ask you something. Can we talk?" We went inside. I made coffee while Jake caught his breath. Ghost sat beside him, accepting ear scratches like they were old friends. "So," Jake began, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened that night, about Ghost and what he did, and how incredible it was. And I realized I'm tired of Fairbanks, tired of the city, even though it's not much of a city. I want to do something different with my life." He looked at me directly. "I want to learn how to live like you do, out here, self-sufficient, working with animals. I know it's a huge ask, and you don't really know me, but I'm a hard worker. I'm good with my hands. I can help rebuild whatever else needs rebuilding, help with the animals, whatever you need." I sipped my coffee, studying him. "This isn't an easy life, Jake. It's isolated, brutal in winter. There are weeks where you don't see another human being." "I know," he said. "But that night, watching Ghost, watching you both, I realized that's what I want. Not the fire, obviously, but the connection, the purpose, working with nature instead of against it." I thought about it. The homestead was more work than one person could really handle, especially now with more animals. Having help would be useful, and Jake had proven himself trustworthy. "2-month trial," I said finally. "You can stay in the old temporary shelter. We'll see if you can handle it. If it works out, we'll talk about something permanent." Jake's face lit up. "Thank you, you won't regret this." "We'll see," I said, but I was smiling. Jake moved in a week later. True to his word, he was very hard-working. He would get up before dawn and never complain about the cold or loneliness. He quickly learned how to care for the animals, maintain the equipment, and survive in the wild. Ghost accepted him immediately, which was the real test. Wolves don't trust easily, but Ghost seemed to sense Jake's sincerity. About 6 weeks into the trial period, while working to expand the reindeer enclosure, Jake suddenly stopped and pointed north. "Elias, look!" I turned. 3 wolves stood at the edge of the trees watching us. One was grey, one brown, and one as white as Ghost. Ghost had seen them too. He stood motionless, watching the other wolves. Nothing happened for a long time. Then Ghost tilted his head back and howled, a long, mournful sound echoing through the valley. The 3 wild wolves howled back. The sound gave me chills. "Are they a threat?" Jake whispered. "I don't think so," I said. "I think they're Ghost's family, or what's left of it." We watched as Ghost slowly walked toward the tree line. The 3 wolves didn't move, didn't threaten. When Ghost was about 20 feet away, the white wolf, clearly the alpha, stepped forward. For several minutes, the 4 wolves engaged in some kind of communication. Body language, sounds I couldn't interpret. Then Ghost turned and walked back to us. The 3 wild wolves melted back into the forest and disappeared. "What was that about?" Jake asked. "I think they were checking on him," I said. "Making sure he's okay. Maybe asking him to come back." "Will he?" I looked at Ghost, who had returned to my side and was leaning against my leg. "No," I said. "He's made his choice. This is his home now." And I realized something in that moment. Ghost hadn't just saved my animals that night. He'd saved me too. He'd given me a reason to rebuild, a reason to trust again, a reason to believe that in this harsh, unforgiving wilderness, genuine loyalty and love could still exist. The summer passed quickly. Jake proved himself capable and dedicated. By the time fall arrived, I'd offered him a permanent position, and he'd accepted gratefully. We were expanding the operation, planning to add a small herd of muskox and possibly some more sled dogs. Ghost remained the heart of the homestead. Every animal trusted him. He'd patrol the property at night, keeping watch. During the day, he'd often disappear into the forest for hours, hunting, running, maintaining his wild nature. But he always came back. Always. One evening, in late September, almost exactly 1 year after the fire, I received an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Anders pulled up just before sunset. "Elias," he said, stepping out of his truck. "Got some news. Marcus Frost was released early for good behavior. He's out." My stomach tightened. "Where is he?" "That's the thing. He came to see me before leaving Fairbanks. Wanted me to give you this." Anders handed me another envelope. I opened it. Inside was a check for $20,000. "What's this?" I asked. "Part of his restitution payment," Anders said. "He sold his property, used the money to pay what he owes you. He's leaving Alaska, moving to Oregon to live with his sister. He wanted you to know he won't be bothering you. He's leaving for good." I stared at the check. $20,000 wouldn't cover even a fraction of what I'd lost, but it was something. More importantly, it meant Marcus was truly taking responsibility. "Did he say anything else?" I asked. Anders nodded. "He said to tell you thank you for the letter you sent him." "I never sent him a letter," I said, confused. "You sure?" Because he seemed pretty certain. Said, "It helped him get through his time inside." I had no idea what Marcus was talking about, but maybe it didn't matter. Maybe he'd found some other source of comfort or forgiveness, and he'd convinced himself it came from me. Or maybe, in some strange way, my silence had been its own form of communication. He also said, Anders continued, that if Ghost ever needs anything, vet care, medicine, whatever, to send him the bill. He'll pay it, however long it takes. I looked at Ghost, who was sitting nearby watching the sunset. The wolf's white fur glowed almost ethereal in the fading light. "Tell Marcus," I said slowly, "that Ghost is fine. Tell him we're all fine. And tell him I hope he finds peace." Anders nodded. "Will do." After the sheriff left, I sat outside the shelter with Ghost, watching the northern lights begin their dance across the sky. Jake was inside preparing dinner. The animals were settling in for the night. Everything I'd built, twice now, was secure, safe, protected. And beside me sat the wolf who made all this possible. "You know what, Ghost?" I said, scratching behind his ears. "I think we're going to be just fine." Ghost's tail swayed gently, and he leaned against my leg. In the distance I heard the howls of wild wolves, Ghost's family keeping tabs on him. And this time, Ghost didn't answer the howl, because he was already home. Winter returned to Alaska with a vengeance. By November, the temperature had dropped to 30 degrees below zero, and snow covered everything in a thick white blanket. The new shelter worked perfectly. Geothermal heating kept the interior comfortable, even when winds outside were strong enough to knock a person over. Jake had adapted to the isolation extraordinarily well. He had proven himself not only capable, but also indispensable. Together, we accomplished twice as much as I could have done alone. The farm was thriving like never before. One morning in mid-December, I woke to find Ghost acting strangely. He was pacing by the door, whining softly, his ears pricked toward the north. This wasn't normal behavior for him. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked, pulling on my thermal gear. Ghost looked at me, then back at the door. His anxiety was palpable. Jake emerged from his quarters already dressed. "Something's got him spooked. Think there's a bear?" "Wrong time of year," I said. "They should all be hibernating by now." But Ghost's agitation was growing. He scratched at the door, something he never did. Whatever was out there, he needed to investigate.
"All right," I said, grabbing my rifle. "Let's check it out. Jake, stay here with the animals."
"You sure? Those temps will kill you in an hour if something goes wrong." "Ghost won't lead me into danger," I said. "He's trying to show me something." I opened the door, and Ghost bolted out into the pre-dawn darkness. I followed, my headlamp cutting through the swirling snow. The wind chill was probably 50 below. Even with my best gear, I could feel the cold trying to find its way through. Ghost was 50 yards ahead, moving with purpose through the deep snow. He'd stop every few seconds to make sure I was following, then continue north into the forest. We walked for nearly 20 minutes. My face was numb despite my balaclava, and my fingers were starting to tingle despite my gloves. Just when I was about to turn back, Ghost stopped at a large snowdrift and began digging frantically. I approached carefully, raising my rifle. If there was an injured predator under there, things could
Get dangerous fast.
But Ghost's body language wasn't aggressive. It was urgent, almost desperate. "What is it, Ghost? What did you find?" Ghost dug deeper, and then I saw it. A flash of dark fur against the white snow. My heart sank. Another wolf, and from the lack of movement, probably dead. But as Ghost cleared more snow away, the wolf's leg twitched. Still alive, barely. I knelt beside the animal, assessing quickly. It was the grey wolf I'd seen months ago when Ghost's family had visited. Smaller than Ghost, probably female, and in bad shape. Her hind leg was mangled, caught in what looked like an illegal trap. She'd obviously chewed herself free, but had lost a lot of blood. The trap was gone, but the damage remained. She was too weak to run or fight. Her eyes followed me, filled with pain and fear, but she didn't have the strength to move. Ghost whined beside her, licking her face gently. Some kind of communication passed between them. Sounds too subtle for me to interpret.
"Okay," I said, mostly to myself. "We need to get her back. She needs help." But how? She was a wild wolf, probably 70 pounds of predator, and even injured, she could do serious damage if she panicked. I couldn't just pick her up. I pulled out my satellite phone and called Jake. "I need you to bring the sled and medical supplies. I'm sending Ghost back to guide you. Follow him exactly. Don't deviate." "What did you find?" "Injured wolf, one of Ghost's pack. We need to move fast." I sent Ghost back to the farm, trusting that he would bring Jake to us. Then I took off my heavy coat and carefully covered the wounded wolf, hoping that my scent combined with Ghost's presence would calm him. He watched me with those amber eyes, and I saw intelligence in them, a calculation between danger and safety. He was deciding whether to trust me. "Calm down, girl," I said softly. "We'll help you. Ghost trusts me, and you trust Ghost. That should be enough." 20 minutes later, I heard The sled's approaching.
Jake appeared through the trees, Ghost running beside him. They had brought the emergency sleds we used to transport injured animals, along with sedatives and medical supplies. "Holy hell," Jake breathed when he saw the wolf. "Is that Ghost's family?" I confirmed. "We need to sedate her before we move her. That leg needs immediate treatment." We worked quickly but carefully. I administered the sedative, just enough to keep her calm during transport, not enough to be dangerous in her weakened state. Within minutes, her eyes began to droop. Together, Jake and I lifted her onto the sled, covering her with blankets. Ghost stayed close the entire time, providing what comfort he could. The return journey was agonizing. We had to move slowly to avoid jostling the injured wolf, but every minute we spent out there was a minute closer to hypothermia for all of us. By the time we reached the homestead, my fingers were completely numb, and Jake's face was white with
Cold.
We brought the wolf into a quarantine area I'd built in the new shelter, a separate room where sick or injured animals could be isolated. I'd dealt with plenty of animal injuries over the years, but this was different. This was a wild wolf, Ghost's family, and the stakes felt impossibly high. The leg was worse than I'd thought. The trap had shattered bone and torn muscle. Even with treatment, she might never walk properly again. In the wild, that would be a death sentence. I cleaned the wound as thoroughly as I could, applied antibiotics, and wrapped it in a stabilizing splint. She'd need real veterinary care, surgery probably, but this would have to do for now. "I'm calling Dr. Chen," I told Jake. "We need her expertise." "Will she come out here, in this weather? For Ghost? After what happened last year?" "Yeah, I think she will." I was right. Dr. Chen answered on the second ring, and when I explained the situation, she didn't hesitate. "I'll leave within the hour. It's a
3-hour drive in these conditions, but I'll get there.
While we waited, I sat with the injured wolf, Ghost, lying nearby. She was breathing more steadily now, the sedative keeping her calm, but her eyes would occasionally crack open and find Ghost, as if checking he was still there. "What do you think happened?" Jake asked, bringing hot coffee. "Illegal trapper, most likely. People still set them despite the regulations. Wolves are considered a threat to livestock, so some folks take matters into their own hands." "That's barbaric. That's survival out here, or what people think is survival. They don't understand that wolves are essential to the ecosystem. Remove them, and everything falls apart." Ghost's head suddenly lifted. He stood and walked to the door, tail wagging. 5 minutes later, I heard the sound of Dr. Chen's truck pulling up. She came in carrying 2 large cases of equipment, her face red from the cold. "Show me the patient," she said without preamble. Dr. Chen examined the injured wolf thoroughly, taking x-rays with a portable machine, checking vitals, assessing the damage. Finally, she sat back. "The good news is she's young and otherwise healthy. The bad news is that leg needs surgery. The bone needs pins, the muscle needs reconstruction. I can do it, but it'll take several hours, and recovery will be long." "Do it," I said, "whatever it costs." "Elias, this is a wild wolf. Even if I save the leg, she may never be released back into the wild. She won't be able to hunt effectively. Are you prepared for that?" I looked at Ghost, who was watching the injured wolf with an intensity I'd never seen before. "Yes," I said. "If she can't go back, she stays here, with Ghost." Dr. Chen nodded. "All right, let's set up a surgical area. Jake, I need you to assist. Elias, you keep Ghost calm. This is going to take a while." The surgery lasted 4.5 hours. Dr. Chen worked with the precision and focus of someone performing brain surgery, not
Field medicine on a wild animal.
Jake assisted perfectly, following her instructions without hesitation. Ghost never left the room. He lay near the surgical table, perfectly still, occasionally whining softly. I sat beside him, one hand on his back, feeling the tension in his muscles. Finally, Dr. Chen straightened up. "Done. The bone is pinned, muscle is repaired, everything that could be saved has been saved. Now it's up to her. If infection doesn't set in, if she heals properly, she'll walk again. Maybe not as well as before, but she'll walk." "Thank you," I said, and meant it with everything I had. Dr. Chen washed up and started packing her equipment. "She'll need antibiotics twice daily, wound care, and complete rest for at least 6 weeks. No weight on that leg. After that, we'll reassess." "I'll take care of her," I promised. Dr. Chen looked at Ghost, then at me. "You know what I think? I think Ghost knew exactly what he was doing when he led you to her. I think he knew you'd help. That level of trust, that level of understanding between human and wolf. I've never seen anything like it." After Dr. Chen left, refusing payment beyond covering her medication costs, Jake and I set up a proper recovery area for the injured wolf. Ghost refused to leave her side. He curled up next to her, his body providing warmth, his presence providing comfort. "What are you going to call her?" Jake asked. I thought about it. Luna's already taken. Maybe Shadow? She's like Ghost's shadow, following him here. "Shadow works," Jake agreed. Over the next few weeks, Shadow slowly recovered. The first few days were critical. She ran a fever, likely from infection, and we had to force antibiotics down her throat. Ghost helped with this, somehow communicating to her that we were trying to help. By the end of the first week, she was eating on her own. By the end of the second, she was alert and watching everything with those intelligent amber eyes. She never tried to bite or
attack us, but she never fully relaxed either. She tolerated our presence because Ghost trusted us, but the wildness never left her. Christmas came and went. Jake's family sent care packages. His mother had apparently adopted me as a son-in-law, despite never meeting me. We had a quiet celebration in the shelter, the animals nearby, Ghost and Shadow resting together in the recovery area. "This is the best Christmas I've ever had," Jake said, raising a mug of hot chocolate. "Even though we're 40 miles from civilization in temperatures that can kill you?" I asked. "Especially because of that," he said seriously. "Out here, everything matters. Every action, every decision. There's no buffer, no safety net. You're really alive." I understood exactly what he meant. By late January, Shadow was putting weight on her injured leg. It would never be perfect. She had a permanent limp, but Dr. Chen's surgery had been successful. The wolf could walk, could move, could survive. The question now was what came next. One evening, I sat with both wolves in the recovery area. "Shadow," I said, knowing she couldn't understand my words but hoping she'd understand my intent, "you can stay here as long as you want. You're safe here, fed, warm, protected. Or, when you're ready, you can go back to your pack. The choice is yours." Ghost looked at me, then at Shadow, and something passed between them, another one of those subtle communications that I couldn't fully interpret. The next morning, Shadow was gone. The door to the recovery area was still closed, but the window, which I'd left cracked for ventilation, was open. She'd squeezed through, despite her injured leg, and disappeared into the forest. "She left," Jake said, stating the obvious as we stared at the open window. Ghost didn't seem surprised. He walked to the window, sniffed the air, and then turned back to his normal routine as if nothing had happened. "Is she going to be okay out there?" Jake asked. "With that leg?" "I don't know," I admitted, but she made her choice. She chose freedom over safety. Over the following weeks, I watched for signs of Shadow. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear wolves howling in the distance, and Ghost would howl back. I like to think Shadow was out there, reunited with her pack, surviving despite her injury. Then, one morning in mid-February, I woke to find Ghost standing at the door, tail wagging frantically. When I opened it, there was Shadow, along with 4 other wolves I didn't recognize. They stood at the tree line, just watching. Shadow was in the middle of the group, standing strong despite her limp. She looked healthy, well-fed. Her pack hadn't abandoned her. They'd waited for her recovery. Ghost walked out to meet them. The wolves greeted each other with the complex body language and vocalizations of their species. For several minutes, they communicated, and then something remarkable happened. One of the wolves, a large male with dark grey fur, approached me cautiously. He stopped about 10 feet away, studying me with the same intelligent gaze Shadow had. Then he lowered his head slightly and backed away. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, maybe even respect. The pack turned and melted back into the forest. Shadow paused at the tree line, looked back at Ghost one more time, and then followed her family into the wilderness. "Did that just happen?" Jake whispered beside me. "Yeah," I said, hardly believing it myself. "I think they just thanked us." Ghost returned to my side, and I could have sworn he was smiling, if wolves could smile. He'd saved one of his own, and she'd returned to where she belonged. February gave way to March. The days grew longer, the temperatures slightly less brutal. The homestead continued to thrive. Aurora had a foal, a beautiful dapple grey male we named Storm. 2 of the female reindeer were pregnant. Life was regenerating all around us. One evening, Sheriff Anders made his quarterly visit, bringing supplies and news from town. "Thought you'd want to know," he said, warming his hands by our fire. "Marcus Frost is doing well in Oregon. Got a job at a lumber yard, living clean.
He sent another check, $5,000. He doesn't have to keep doing that, I said. I think he needs to, for his own peace of mind. Anders pulled out a photograph. He also sent this, said you'd want to see it. The photo showed Marcus standing in front of a small house, looking
healthier than I'd seen him in years. He was smiling, genuinely smiling.
He also wanted me to tell you something specific, Anders continued. He said to tell you that he thinks about that night every day, about what could have happened, about what did happen. And he said that Ghost saved more than just your animals, he saved Marcus too, made him realize what was important before it was too late. I looked at the photo for a long moment, then handed it back. Keep it, I said. I don't need it. But tell Marcus I'm glad he found his way. As winter finally began to release its grip on Alaska, I spent more time thinking about the past year and a half. The fire that had destroyed everything, Ghost's incredible heroism, Marcus's betrayal and eventual redemption, Shadow's rescue and return to the wild, Jake finding his purpose. All of it was connected, woven together in ways I was only beginning to understand. One night in late March, I stood outside the shelter under a clear sky,
brilliant with stars and northern lights.
Ghost sat beside me, and Jake was nearby, checking on the animals one final time before bed. You know what I realized? I said to Ghost, scratching behind his ears. That fire was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But it also led to some of the best things. Meeting Jake, saving Shadow, learning who I could really trust, building something better than before. Ghost leaned against my leg, his warmth a comfort in the cold air. Sometimes, I continued, the worst moments in life crack us open so something better can grow. We just have to survive them first. Thunder rumbled in the distance, unusual for this time of year, but not unheard of. Ghost's ears pricked up, and he tilted his head, listening to something I couldn't hear. Then he did something he'd never done before. He turned, looked me directly in the eyes, and placed his paw on my hand. It was a deliberate gesture, a conscious choice, and in that moment, I understood that.
Whatever bond had formed between us went deeper than training or domestication or simple companionship.
This was partnership, mutual respect, love in the way that transcended species. I know, buddy, I whispered. I know. The northern lights danced overhead, painting the snow in shades of green and purple and blue. In the distance, wolves howled, Shadow's pack checking in. Ghost howled back, a sound both wild and tamed, both freedom and home. And I realized that maybe that was the secret. Maybe you didn't have to choose between wild and tamed, between freedom and security, between solitude and connection. Maybe, if you were lucky enough and brave enough, you could have both. Spring arrived in full force by early April. The snow melted rapidly, revealing the land beneath, brown and muddy at first, then slowly greening as life returned. The reindeer gave birth, adding 3 healthy calves to the herd. Aurora's foal Storm was growing stronger every day, already showing the spirit
of his mother.
Jake had become indispensable. What had started as a trial period had evolved into a true partnership. We'd even begun discussing expanding the operation further, perhaps adding a small maple syrup production in a few years, or breeding programs for the reindeer. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The trauma of the fire felt distant now, like something that had happened to different people in a different lifetime. Then, one morning in mid-April, everything changed. I was in the shelter checking on the pregnant reindeer when I heard Jake shouting from outside. Not a casual call, a yell of genuine alarm. I grabbed my rifle and ran out. Jake was standing near the northern fence, pointing toward the tree line. Ghost was beside him, every muscle in his body rigid, a low growl rumbling from his chest. 4 men were walking toward the homestead. They were dressed in hunting gear, carrying rifles, and something about the way they moved set off every alarm bell in my head. Elias Stone, the lead man called out. He was tall, maybe 50, with a weathered face and cold eyes. "That's me," I said, keeping my rifle lowered but ready. "This is private property. What do you want?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Carter, Dave Carter. We're with Northern Wildlife Control. We've been tracking a pack of wolves that's been killing livestock in the valley. Trail led us here." My blood ran cold. "There are no wolves here killing livestock. Ghost is domesticated." "Ghost?" Carter's smile widened. "That your white wolf?" "Yeah, we've heard about him. Famous rescue dog, saves animals from fires. Real heartwarming story." "He's not a dog," I said carefully. "And he doesn't hunt livestock. He's fed here, well cared for." Carter exchanged glances with his men. "See, that's where we have a problem. We've got 3 ranchers who've lost sheep in the past month. All the kills have wolf signatures, and the tracks—" He pulled out a photo and held it up. "White wolf tracks, leading right back to this area." I looked at the photo. The tracks were definitely from a white wolf, large paw prints in mud, measuring about 4.5 inches across. "That's not Ghost," I said firmly. "He hasn't left this property in weeks." "You sure about that? You watch him every second of every day?" I wasn't, actually. Ghost had freedom to roam. Some nights he'd disappear for hours. I'd always assumed he was hunting rabbits or running for the joy of it. But livestock? "He doesn't hunt livestock," I repeated. "It's not in his nature." "Nature?" Carter laughed. "He's a wolf. Hunting is exactly his nature. Look, we don't want trouble, but we've got authorization from Fish and Wildlife to eliminate the problem wolves. If Ghost is innocent like you claim, you'll keep him contained. If we find him out near those ranches—" He let the threat hang in the air. "You're not shooting my wolf," I said, raising my rifle slightly. Carter's men tensed, their hands moving toward their own weapons. The situation was escalating fast. "Elias," Jake said quietly beside me, "let's not do this." He was right. A gunfight would end badly for everyone. But the thought of anyone hunting Ghost made my blood boil. "Fine," I said, lowering my rifle. "Ghost stays on the property. But I'm telling you, you're tracking the wrong wolf." Carter nodded slowly. "We'll see. You've got 3 days. If there's another kill after that, we're coming back. And next time, we won't be asking permission." They left, and I stood there shaking with anger and fear. Jake put a hand on my shoulder. "We need to figure out what's really going on," he said. "I know it's not Ghost," I said. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. How could I be certain? Wolves were predators. It was their nature to hunt. Had I been naive, thinking Ghost had completely suppressed his wild instincts? That night, I did something I'd never done before. I locked Ghost inside the shelter. He whined at the door, confused and upset. But I couldn't risk it. If Carter found him near another kill, they'd shoot on sight. "I'm sorry, buddy," I said, sitting beside him. "It's for your own safety. Just until we figure this out." Ghost's eyes met mine, and I saw confusion there, maybe even betrayal. It broke my heart. For the next 2 nights, Ghost remained locked in. He barely ate. He paced constantly. The wild spirit I'd always respected was suffering in captivity, even though the shelter was spacious and comfortable. On the 3rd morning, Jake burst into my quarters before dawn. "Elias, wake up! There's been another kill!" I bolted upright. "What? Where?" "Morrison's ranch, about 12 miles east. He called Sheriff Anders. They're saying it's the white wolf again." "That's impossible," I said, already pulling on clothes. "Ghost has been locked in for 3 days. I haven't let him out once." "I know. That's why we need to get down there. This proves it's not him." We drove to Morrison's ranch as fast as the muddy spring roads would allow. Sheriff Anders was already there, examining the kill site. 3 sheep lay dead, their throats torn out. It was brutal and efficient, the work of an experienced predator. "Elias," Anders said when he saw me. "Carter called me, said he'd given you a warning." "Ghost has been locked in my shelter for 3 days," I said firmly. "He couldn't have done this. There's another white wolf out there." Anders walked me over to the tracks. clear paw prints in the mud,
leading away from the kill site.
White fur stuck to the fence where the wolf had jumped over. "These are fresh," Anders said, "from last night, and they lead north toward your property." "It's not Ghost," I insisted, "but there might be another explanation. Shadow, the wolf we rescued, she's white-furred too, and she's back with her pack." Anders considered this. "The injured female? She'd hunt livestock with a bad leg?" "Wolves are survivors. If she can't take down wild game effectively anymore, she might go after easier targets." "That would make sense," Jake added. "We healed her, but we couldn't fix her limp. She's permanently disabled for hunting in the wild." Anders looked at the tracks again, then at the torn fence. "All right, I'll tell Carter about this possibility. But Elias, if it is this shadow wolf, and she's part of a pack targeting livestock, they're all in danger, not just her. The implications hit me hard. If Shadow and her pack were the ones killing sheep, fish,
and wildlife would authorize their elimination.
the wolves I'd helped save would be hunted down. "Give me time," I said. "Let me track them, find out what's happening. There has to be a solution that doesn't end in bloodshed." "How much time?" Anders asked. 24 hours. 1 day." Anders shook his head. "Carter's not going to wait. He's got pressure from the ranchers. 3 more kills, and they're forming a hunting party. Then I'll move fast." Back at the homestead, I prepared for a tracking expedition. Jake wanted to come, but I needed him to stay with the animals. This was something I had to do myself, and Ghost was coming with me. "You sure about this?" Jake asked as I unlocked the shelter door. "If Carter sees him out there." "Ghost is the only one who can help me find Shadow's pack, and he can communicate with them in ways I can't. It's a risk, but it's necessary." Ghost bounded out of the shelter the moment I opened the door, clearly relieved to be free again. But when
I started gearing up for a trek into the wilderness, his demeanor changed. He understood we were going hunting, but not for food. We headed north, following the tracks from Morrison's ranch. The trail was clear at first, but as we moved deeper into the forest, it became harder to follow. Ghost took the lead, his nose to the ground, reading scents I couldn't detect. We tracked for 6 hours, moving steadily through increasingly rough terrain. The landscape here was wild and unforgiving. Steep ravines, dense forest, areas where avalanches had torn through, leaving fallen trees scattered like toothpicks. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, Ghost stopped. His ears pricked forward, and he released a low whine. We'd found them. Shadow's pack was sheltered in a rocky outcropping, a natural cave that provided protection from wind and rain. 6 wolves, Shadow, the alpha male I'd seen before, 3 younger wolves, and a tiny pup that couldn't have been more than a few months old. Stayed back, letting Ghost approach first. The pack tensed when they saw him, but didn't flee. Ghost and Shadow touched noses, and some kind of communication happened. Sounds too subtle for me to hear, body language too complex for me to fully interpret. Then I saw something that explained everything. The alpha male was injured. His right front leg hung at an awkward angle, broken or badly sprained, and 2 of the younger wolves were thin, ribs showing through their fur. The pack was starving. "Oh no," I whispered. I understood now. Shadow couldn't hunt effectively because of her leg. The alpha was injured and couldn't lead hunts. The pack was desperate, turning to easy targets, livestock, because they couldn't take down wild game anymore. They were dying, and they were taking risks that would get them killed. Ghost turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw a question. "Can you help them?" I pulled out my satellite phone and called Jake. "I need you to bring something. A lot of something."
"What?" "Meat. All of it. Every bit of fish, venison and caribou we have stored. Load it on the sled and bring it to these coordinates. And bring medical supplies. We've got an injured alpha." "Elias, are you crazy? That's our winter store. That's months of food." "I know, but it's the only way to stop them from hunting livestock. We feed them, heal the alpha, and they go back to wild hunting." Jake was silent for a moment. Then, "All right, I'm on my way." While I waited for Jake, I slowly approached the pack. They watched me warily, but Ghost's presence kept them from fleeing or attacking. I stopped about 20 feet away and sat down in the snow, making myself non-threatening. Shadow limped forward, stopping halfway between me and the pack. She studied me for a long moment, then looked back at her family. Another complex exchange of wolf communication followed. Then the alpha male stood, painfully, clearly suffering, and approached. He stopped 10 feet away, his eyes meeting mine. I'd faced dangerous animals before. Bears, moose in rut, even a wolverine once. But this was different. This wasn't just danger. This was intelligence evaluating intelligence. A person meeting a person, just wearing different forms. "I want to help," I said quietly, knowing he couldn't understand the words, but hoping he'd understand the tone. "Your pack is dying. I can't let that happen." The alpha tilted his head, listening. "But you have to stop killing livestock. Those ranchers will hunt you down. All of you, including the pup." As if understanding, the alpha glanced back at the tiny pup huddled in the cave entrance. Jake arrived 90 minutes later, the sled loaded with every bit of preserved meat we had. The pack retreated deeper into the cave when they saw him, but Ghost barked once, a sharp, commanding sound, and they stopped. We unloaded the food at the cave entrance. Easily 200 pounds of meat, fish, venison, caribou, even some of the premium cuts I'd been saving for special occasions. "That's everything," Jake said. "We're going to have to hunt hard to replace all this." "I know," I said, "but look at them. They're desperate." The younger wolves crept forward first, drawn by the scent of food. They began eating frantically, and gradually the rest of the pack joined them. Even the injured alpha ate, though he kept one eye on us the entire time. While they fed, I examined the alpha's leg from a safe distance. It was definitely broken, probably from a fall or a fight with prey. With rest and proper care, it would heal. But out here in the wild, with a pack to feed, he'd been pushing himself beyond his limits. I turned to Jake. "We need to come back, regularly. Bring food until the alpha heals, and they can hunt properly again." "Elias, that could be months. We don't have the resources to feed 6 wolves for months." He was right. But what choice did we have? Then I remembered something. Marcus's checks. The restitution. Payments. I barely touched them, letting them accumulate in my account. It was money I'd never asked for, money that felt tainted by betrayal. But maybe this was what it was for. Maybe this was how the cycle of harm could become a cycle of healing. "We'll buy meat from suppliers in Fairbanks," I said. "Make regular supply runs. It'll cost a fortune, but it's the only way." Over the next few weeks, Jake and I made the journey to Shadow's pack 3 times a week, bringing food and checking on the alpha's recovery. Slowly, the pack began to trust us. Not fully, never fully, but enough to accept our presence without fleeing. And miraculously, the livestock killings stopped. Carter and his hunting party showed up at my homestead twice more, suspicious and angry, but Sheriff Anders backed me up. No new kills, no evidence Ghost or any other wolves were the problem. Eventually, Carter had to admit defeat and leave. By early June, the alpha was walking again. His leg had healed, though like Shadow, he'd have a permanent limp. But he could hunt. I watched from a distance one evening as the pack successfully took down a deer, working together with the coordination and intelligence that made wolves apex predators. They didn't need our food anymore. On our final supply run, I brought only a small amount of meat, a parting gift. Ghost and I stood at the edge of the pack's territory waiting. Shadow emerged first, followed by the alpha and the rest of the pack. They approached slowly, cautiously, but there was something different in their body language. Not fear, not desperation, something like gratitude. The alpha stopped in front of me, and we regarded each other one last time. Then he did something extraordinary. He bent his head low, almost like a bow, and backed away. One by one, each member of the pack did the same. Even the pup, now much larger and more confident, mimicked the gesture. It was formal, deliberate. A farewell and a thank you in the only language they
had. Ghost watched his family, and I saw conflict in his eyes, the pull of the wild versus the choice he'd made to stay with me. For a moment, I thought he might go with them, and if he chose that, I would have let him. After everything, he'd earned his freedom. But Ghost turned away from the pack and walked back to my side. He'd made his choice long ago, and he was confirming it now. Shadow was the last to leave. She and Ghost touched noses one final time, and I heard her make a sound, soft, almost mournful. Then she turned and followed her pack into the forest. We never saw them again. 1 month later, I was going through old storage boxes, organizing papers, when I found something that stopped me cold. An envelope. Old, weathered, with my name written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter dated 5 years ago, before I'd even moved to Alaska. Dear son, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I wanted you to know I'm proud of the man you've become, even if we didn't always see eye to eye.
The property in Alaska, it's yours now. The coordinates are attached. I bought it years ago, hoping we'd build something there together. We never got that chance, but maybe you can build something there on your own. There's a pack of wolves on that land, white wolves, rare and beautiful. Protect them if you can. They've been there longer than any of us. Your father. My father had died 5 years ago. I'd never known he owned land in Alaska, never knew he'd left it to me. The letter must have gotten lost in the chaos of his estate, only recently forwarded here. I pulled out my maps, checked the coordinates. My homestead was built on my father's land, the land he'd bought to protect white wolves. Ghost's ancestors had been here all along, and somehow, impossibly, my father had known they needed protection. The cycle wasn't breaking, it was completing. I walked outside, letter still in my hand, and found Ghost lying in his favorite spot overlooking the valley. The summer sun was setting, painting everything in gold and orange. Did you know? I asked, sitting beside him. Somehow, did you know this was always meant to happen? Ghost looked at me with those ice-blue eyes, and I could have sworn he smiled. The homestead had been rebuilt better than before. The pack was safe and thriving in the wild. Jake had found his purpose. Even Marcus had found redemption. And Ghost, my incredible white wolf, my guardian, my friend, had been the thread connecting it all. Some people might call it luck, others might call it fate. I didn't know what to call it except maybe meant to be. You know what I think? I said, scratching behind Ghost's ears. I think you saved more than just animals that night. I think you saved all of us. Showed us what really matters. Loyalty, courage, the bonds that hold us together when everything else falls apart. Ghost leaned against me, and in the distance I heard wolves howling, Shadow's pack checking in from wherever
They'd settled. Ghost howled back, a sound that spoke of wild places and unbreakable bonds. Jake emerged from the shelter, saw us sitting together, and smiled. Everything okay? Better than okay, I said, standing up. Everything's exactly as it should be. We walked back to the shelter together, human, and wolf. 3 souls who'd found each other in the wilderness and built something lasting. The northern lights would dance tonight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But right now, in this moment, everything was perfect. Ghost looked back one last time toward the forest where his family roamed free, then followed me inside. Because this was his home now, his choice, his family. And maybe that was the greatest gift any of us could receive, the freedom to choose where we belonged, and the courage to stay there, even when the wild called. The shelter door closed behind us, shutting out the cold. But inside there was warmth, there was safety, there was love, and there was Ghost, forever the hero, forever the guardian, forever home.